Okay, okay, well, we are very excited to have Dr. Yahnke back again. He was here a year ago, if you remember, talking about squirrels. Well, we could be talking about, you can accept it, yeah. Got it. He could talk about squirrels. We could talk about soccer. We could talk about bats, obviously. We can talk about, okay, yeah, we can talk Peace Corps. But tonight's topic is about bats. So obviously Dr. Yahnke has lots of skills and talents. Today our focus is going to be on bats and learning more about that. I'll just share a little bit of the bio, which you might have received if you get the newsletter. In 2007, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources established the Wisconsin Bat Program to collect statewide data on bat communities. Only a few of the original long-term bat monitoring stations are still operational, but new partnerships between UWSP and a variety of individuals and organizations have added their knowledge of this threatened group of Wisconsin animals. Learning what these newly hosted bat monitoring stations are teaching us about bat communities and in the state. Chris Yahnke is a professor of wildlife at UWSP with an interest in mammals, conservation, biology, and the scholarship of teaching and learning. He has worked with the U.S. Forest Service studying peregrine falcons in the Green Mountains, the Center for Disease Control, looking at rodent-borne illnesses in South America, and the San Diego Zoo captive breeding peccaries. How do you say this? Peccaries. In the Paraguayan Chaco. He is currently interested in how squirrels can improve job readiness skills in college undergraduates across the country. And bats, yeah, he really likes bats. So love him or hate him, this presentation today is about bats. Welcome, Chris.
I could also talk about wildlife art because, or bird art. If you come to my office, I have Gromy's passenger pigeons. And then in my home office at home in the basement, I have Gromy's whooping cranes. And so my dad got, if you know about, there's a series of extinct and endangered birds that he did. So we've got the match number prints for all of those with the original art in the back. And he also collected Scott Zellicks. So I've got some Zellick loons, but this isn't about that. I could also talk about what Lynn was talking about, the solar project down in the south of the county. We're going to start looking at this summer, just what's there now so that we could kind of track the impacts on wildlife, focusing on pollinators, bats, small mammals. But again, the money is going to be prairie chickens. And so that's kind of the biggest potential impact. And we're not sure in which direction because what they're planning on doing with the land is some prairie restoration. So we could be creating prairie chicken habitat. So we're not quite sure. It's an interesting project. But I'm here to talk about bats. The first thing I kind of want to talk about is what they brought to us globally in the way of a pandemic, but to not blame the bats, and so bats are natural reservoirs for something called coronaviruses. Okay, so they're kind of the main reservoirs. And so if we look at bat diversity just globally, so we're kind of missing a little bit up here, but that's all right, because it shows the main part. If we just consider just bat species richness, kind of the epicenter of richness globally is in South America. And so there's a lot of really cool bats here. I just got back from Costa Rica. I'll talk about my favorite bat there, but we had over 100 species of bats in Costa Rica. And we were able to use our acoustic arrays to identify them acoustically. We could identify 30 of them. Okay, that's what basically wildlife acoustics is able to do right now. They don't have training. This is actually good use of AI, artificial intelligence, is how many of you use Merlin for learning bird songs? How many of you use iNaturalist for learning plants and fungi and everything else? That's all artificial intelligence, right? So they're learning shapes. They're learning shapes of songs. They're learning shapes of plants and fungi and stuff like that. So that's AI. And I'll talk a little bit about how we use AI in Bat ID. But anyway, so we've got most of the global, a lot of very high richness in South America. And this is actually just what they sampled. So if they went through and they just sampled bats, so this is a big research, global research program, and they just like looked at viruses and say, what do these have coronaviruses? And when I say coronavirus, it's a large family of viruses. There's the famous one that we all know about. How many of you have hosted the famous coronavirus, right? And then when you look at what species actually host coronaviruses, and there's alpha and beta coronaviruses, the global diversity here is in the Southeast Asia, okay? But you do get some spillovers. So we have, in fact, even in North America, a few of our bats, like big brown bats, that have been found to naturally become infected with coronaviruses. But anyway, so we've got Southeast Asia. I just wanted to talk about one of the bats that we saw in La Selva, which is an OTS. It's an Organization of Tropical States. It's just celebrated 60 years, I think, as a research station. We'll go with that. So we had 20 students down there, and we were just looking around, saw some really cool things like pit vipers, but I don't really care about pit vipers. I was looking for bats. And then so we got there was a rumor that someone found some Honduran white bats. These are tent making bats. So they actually take, they're called heliconia leaves, and they'll just, you can see the bite marks. They'll bite along the midrib of that leaf until the leaf kind of folds over. And then they've just created a nice little waterproof house for themselves. And so we found these. So these are 10 little Honduran white bats, and we were very careful. We went with the guide, and we only took one picture for the class. So not every student got to take a picture. This is the class picture of our Honduran white bats. But they're so freaking adorable. I mean, they're so cute. And I was just so thrilled. I actually bought a white bat t-shirt. You know, it's the only t-shirt that I bought in Costa Rica. Good news, they don't carry coronaviruses. So we've got, these are all the coronaviruses you've got. We're not going to get into the clade of the alpha and the beta coronaviruses. I'll just show you that a lot of these are naturally hosted by bats. We go down here, here's the one that's been causing all the problems. It's in this beta coronavirus group. Lots of things carry it, but its main reservoir where we believe that it evolved is in a group of bats called the Rhinolophidae. And we're not quite sure the spillover of this. Some people said it went from bats to pangolins. Some people, well, we don't know. There's all sorts of weird theories, right? So all we do know is it got into humans. There's another one called MERS that did get into it. We had a little bit of a scare years ago with SARS, CoV-1, but this is the one that caused global pandemic. Okay. Just very quickly, we won't get into this. Again, looking at all that, this is the only family that we have in Wisconsin, Vespertilionidae. Of all the global familial diversity, first of all, let's just kind of throw out a question because you seem like a really smart group of people. What percentage of all mammalian species, you know, are bats? So if you took out, I will tell you, I'll throw this out there. There are 5,400 species of mammals-ish. Okay. So what percentage of those 5,400 species are bats?
1.
We've got to start. Okay.
20.
What? 20. It's 22. Yes. So it's right in there, like about 22. Okay. So it's the second largest order of mammals after rodents. Okay, I talked about squirrels because it's the largest. I'm just kind of going down. I'll get to some weird order of marsupials in about 5 years or so. So yeah, rodents and then bats. So about 1,200 species of bats. Again, 1,200 species. That's a lot. There's a lot of species. Vespertilionidae is a very large family. Just a large family. They all eat insects. All the bats that live in Wisconsin eat insects. And so yeah, and so they sampled a lot of those, but only 91 were shown to carry some type of coronavirus. So a fraction. But the largest fraction, I guess, we have is the rhinolophidae here. So roughly a third of every rhinolophid had some type of coronavirus. Rhinolophids, the common name are horseshoe bats. They're kind of cool looking. I had a picture of a horseshoe bat. It's over here somewhere. There they are. This is the actual, it's a common Chinese horseshoe bat. So they're called horseshoe bats because they've got this horseshoe for a nose, and then they got this nose leaf thing, and they scream through their nostrils. Okay, so we've got two flavors of bats. We've got the oral screamers, the ones like us that scream through their mouths. And then you've got the nasal screamers, the ones like them that scream through their nostrils. Okay. Other nostril screamers include toothed whales, right? So you've got your dolphins and stuff like that that also scream through their nostrils. Okay. Anyway, so we've got the rhinolophids. So the horseshoe bats, those are the ones that cause this big kerfuffle in the country. Okay. So we're gonna switch beers. I'll switch beers. I'll switch beers later on. Okay. I'm gonna switch gears. From the pandemic that they caused to a pandemic that is being caused to them. So we went through something, but they're also going through something. And I'm going to introduce our Wisconsin bats by the threats to those bats. So we have 7, I would say 7 species of bats. Arguably, we could go with an eighth species. There's a bat called an evening bat that just makes it into like Grant County. There's like 1 breeding colony that was ever found. So I'm not really counting them as a bat that occurs here, although we found them, but they may move north, but it's a little bit more southern bat. So we have the bats that are really threatened by white nose syndrome. So we'll talk a little bit more about white nose syndrome. That's the fungus that started in New York State in 2007, that winter of 6 to 7, and has been spreading through the United States ever since. Okay, and it's a cold-loving fungus that attacks not just the nose. We tend to see it on the nose. This is kind of my background. That's where it was given its name, white nose syndrome. If you think of why would you see it around the nose, they're still breathing. So when bats hibernate, their metabolism drops, but they're still respirating. So it's a little moist around the nose. So that's kind of where the fungus is going to kind of show up. But it's pretty much infecting the entire body. So here's a northern long-eared bat, where the entire thing is fuzzy. And what's really getting infected are the wing membranes. It's basically causing an irritation. Then they come out of hibernation too often, and hibernation, by definition, is a lowering of the body temperature to near freezing. Okay. I tend to ask my students this question on their mammalogy final. They tend to get it wrong, even though I told them the answer well ahead of time. What's the largest hibernating mammal in Wisconsin? Most people say bear.
Woodchuck.
It's the woodchuck. Okay, so it's the woodchuck. So it's a ground squirrel. It's about 5 kilograms. ish, I don't know, what's a woodchuck? Anyone never hug a woodchuck? We'll give it a healthy 12 pounds of woodchuck, okay? So there's a size limitation to what you can drop down to freezing and bring up and drop down and bring up. So there's this misconception, and I had this misconception for years because I watched chipmunks and I watched 13-line ground squirrels go into hibernation, and then I don't see them again until April. Birders are very big into knowing when red-winged blackbirds start singing in the marshes, you know, in the spring. It means something, right? Mammalogists are big in when am I going to see my first 13-line ground squirrel? It's spring then, but they've been kind of coming in and out all winter. So they don't just sleep all winter. They come out about once every 3 or 4 weeks. And so you just don't necessarily see them, you know, so they're just kind of coming out of hibernation. So it takes a lot of energy to bring that body temperature from freezing to 37. So 0 to 37, we'll use Celsius because we're scientists. Okay. And bears don't do that. You know, a bear, we'll go back to Fahrenheit so that we don't blow our heads off here. So bears can drop their body temperature to about 88 Fahrenheit. And so they're lethargic. My colleague, Katie Sartini, just went up with some students up to the Michigan border to collar a black bear and then check the collar and look at her new cubs. And so you can kind of handle a black bear at 88 degrees. They're just like, you know, it's just, they're cold. Things don't react quickly, even 10 degrees lower. Okay. But anyway, so this fungus does really well in these cold, moist caves. And we think that it came from Europe, okay? That it came with spelunkers that just, you know, nothing malicious here. They just brought a fungus with them. And now it's been spreading around the country. But, and so we think that Europe went through this a long time ago. What Europe doesn't have that we do have are these massive colonies of bats. 50 million Mexican free-tailed bats in a single cave. You know, 60,000 little brown bats in a cave in the Sita. So we've got large hibernating colonies, and they don't really have that in Europe. And one idea is they kind of went through this white nose problem, and what you see now in Europe is recovery. That's what recovery looks like. But anyway, so it's these 3 bats that are really getting clobbered by it. Our little brown bat, the northern long-eared bat, and the tricolored bat, or eastern pipistrelle. I love this picture. Does anyone know? We know exactly how old this bat is because we've got a tag on it. It's got an armband on it, and it was tagged in Wisconsin by the DNR, and then it was recaptured by the DNR. Anyone want to guess how old that bat is?
No.
35 years old. So there's a weird thing with bats. You know, the general rule with mammals is small body size, short lifespan, large body size, long lifespan. Bats are an enigma. You know, so a small bat can live 25, 27 years. This is the longest living recorded little brown bat. You know, it's a 35-year-old bat. It's pretty cool. Okay. The other cool thing about these little brown bats, Mary just told me about like a possible colony, you know, over near Elmond. I'm just going to guess. I don't know. Just knowing where you live. Those maternity colonies, there's a fancy word. It's called philopatric. Those females go back to that same place year after year after year. So they may migrate and they may spend their winters up in the copper mines up in the UP, but they're going to come back to that structure near Elmond. All those females from all over the different parts of the states, they're going to go there and they're going to raise their pups. And they've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years. And then you buy a house and you say something stupid like, that bat's in my house. No, you're in their house. They've been there a lot longer than you have. Now I understand there is conflict, but it's amazing when you think about these maternity colonies and their ability to find their way back. So anyway, so these are the bats that are threatened by white nose, and then we have some bats that are threatened by wind turbine collisions. These are our migrating bats. These are strong flying bats. Not all bats migrate. they hibernate locally. It's like, I'm just gonna go somewhere local and hunker down. Some are like, I'm just gonna go fly south, like my parents, and just hang out in Florida all winter. So we've got hoary bats, eastern red bats, and silver-haired bats. So they're gonna fly down to different parts, coastal, the Gulf Coast, California coast, the Ohio River Valley, wherever it might be. And during that migration is when they're getting impacted by wind turbines. Now, it's not direct collision. A lot of people think these bats are just flying in the turbine, but there was this brilliant graduate student at the University of Alberta named Erin Bearwald. She's just a master's student, and she started like collecting, the dead bats on the landscape at the base of these and doing necropsies and found no broken bones. What she found was the thoracic cavities had just blown up. And she called it barotrauma. What was happening is as that blade was rotating and the bat flew through the rotating blade, the differential pressure on both sides of the blade just kind of exploded their lungs. And then they just crashed and burned. Okay. Again, you're like, how could that happen? It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Well, that's because it's us. We might not be affected, but it's like a little bat that's like expending a lot of energy to do this crazy stuff. And so barotrauma from like a 22-year-old kid in Alberta figuring this out was like a pretty inspiring thing. And so we have, these beautiful, the hoary bat, strongest flying bat. This is the only native land mammals in Hawaii. It's called a Hawaiian bat. It's actually a cold adapted bat. It probably got blown off course when it was migrating from the Aleutian Islands in Alaska back south, ended up in Hawaii. Genetic evidence shows that it happened at least twice, 2 independent times, that you got these like weird cold adapted bats ending up in Hawaii. Okay. Yeah. And then we have our friend, the big brown bat. This one just seems to be the one that isn't affected by either of those two things. They don't migrate, and they're big enough, and they don't really hibernate in large colonies. Right now, when I'm hearing someone that has a bat in their house, I'm 99% sure I'm gonna find a big brown bat. If I go investigate, it's gonna look like this. It's gonna be tan, it's gonna have black wings, it's gonna have a body size about yay big, okay? And the big brown bats, they're flying all winter. Like they'll go into hibernation, but we have detectors out in Schmeekly, and we're picking them up in January. And so they just fly around, go to the bathroom, go back to their little hole in the tree. Okay. So these are doing pretty well, in fact. One of the many things I love about our state is just how we engage our citizens. And so we've got some of the best citizen science programs in the country, I would argue. And so when a bat ecologist in Madison learned that there was white nose syndrome, within months, he put the word out to Wisconsinites to say, there's a potential threat. We need to keep our eye out for bats. And so they had posters like this, if you know where there's a large colony of bats, let us know. If you want to get involved, here's how to get involved. The site's still active. You can go to the Wisconsin Bat Program, and there's all sorts of things there. Acoustic monitoring, so you can, has anyone ever gone like on a bat walk? So different nature centers will do this. When I was on sabbatical at the Urban Ecology Center, I used to take people on bat walks in the Three Bridges area down in the Menominee Valley. We used to do bat walks, here in town. My students would take people on bat walks. And what you're doing is you're basically taking, now I can take an iPad with a microphone on it. Before it was kind of a larger unit. It had GPS capability. And every time a bat flew by, it would basically record that bat. And then you could send that to the DNR, and then they would analyze it and send you a map back of all the bats. So I've got really cool bat maps from Mead. My favorite is from Tree Lake near Rosholt. A friend of mine and I grabbed a 6-pack of Miller, jumped in a paddle boat and paddled around the lake all night with a bat detector. called it research. You know, and it was really fun. You know, he's a painter in Milwaukee, and so it was really fun to teach him about bats. And these are the bats that are flying around the lake that you're staying at. Roost monitoring, that's something Heather Caracca is really engaged with. So if you know where there's a large roost of bats, you can actually basically adopt that roost and say, well, I'll monitor this bat, and then or this roost, and then you can upload that data here. Yeah, so there's a crew of just really dedicated bat ecologists. This is Dave Reddle. He actually started this. Tragically, he died of a brain tumor and brain cancer. It's got to be about 10 years ago now. But there's actually, we have the Midwest Bat Working Group. We have a scholarship in Dave's name. So there's those in the bat community just really love Dave and his wife, Jennifer, his widow, Jennifer, who's remarried now with a new baby, just adorable. Paul White is still the main bat ecologist in Madison. It's my friend Jeff Hupschman. Jeff is a Franklin's ground squirrel guy from Nebraska, you know, but he got to Wisconsin and he's at UW-Platteville. If you've ever been down there, I mean, that's kind of bat central in Wisconsin. That's where you get the pipistrelles and along the Mississippi there. It's great. I lived in Dubuque and there was a lot of bats. And so Jeff is part of this team of great biologists. My grad student, Jennifer Summers, did her master's on bats in mines in Maiden Rock, which is an old sand mine for fracking, an old fracking mine. So they monitor the hibernacula every winter just to see how they're doing. If the bat, right now we're in recovery, so a lot of our bats have been going through white nose. But again, going back to Dave's original idea, one of the things he did in 2007 is we established bat detectors. So just stationary passive monitoring stations. We did 5 of those. The one in Green Bay and the one in the Arboretum died within a year. So they haven't really provided much data. The one in Schmeekley, if you've ever gone through Schmeekley, I'll show you what that station looked like. That's been operational since 2007. The one at the Urban Ecology Center, as I think about 2009, we're still getting data out of there. And the one up at Kemp Natural Resources Station. So these are the ones that my students and I have been monitoring since they came online. Kemp's kind of been having problems. We just got a new one at Point because we're very vocal about, we want data. You know, we just love data. So just send us a new unit. And I'll try to get a new unit for my friends down at the Urban Ecology Center. Another thing that they used to do was the Bat Festival. I've got my last Bat Festival shared on. Every year we would do a Bat Festival and it was a lot of fun. And this is Jennifer Reddle, Paul White, myself, and whoever else would organize these. We'd move it around the state. So we did it at the Mitchell Park Domes, 1 year at the Urban Ecology Center, and 1 year at the Milwaukee Public Museum. But we also did one in Madison and up in Ashland. I think there were only about 5 or 6. There's 2 reasons that the Bat Festival pretty much died. One, Jennifer got married and had a baby, and so she was like the big organizer. But that was like minor compared to this other problem. There was a bat educator named Rob Mees, and he had all these cool bat permits, and he'd bring fruit bats and all of these really cool bats for educational thing. And then he was like, we'll just say, thrown in jail for not being a good person. Okay. And so that's unfortunate, you know, that we just had an entire festival around like something like that. But while it was going on, we did a lot of really cool, good programs. Maybe it'll come back someday. But it was pretty fun. So here's the detector in, here's the detector in Schmeekley, if you've ever seen that. One thing we do well at Schmeekley is really cool signs. And so we don't like hide things. It's like, look at our detector. Now what's going on with this is every time a bat flies by, the microphone records it and it records it. And then we can go through and use artificial intelligence. We'll use a program called Kaleidoscope Pro. The feds actually developed their own free programs too, but Kaleidoscope Pro so Kaleidoscope Pro now costs $400 a year. It's an annual license. But when they first started, you could buy a lifetime license for $1,500, which I did. Now they can't take it away from me. Okay. So it's just a good thing to do because they don't offer that anymore. So I get to use my lifetime license. And that's great. So I take all those audio files and I can run it through. I can run 10,000 files through and it'll tell me this is what flew by. Okay. And so this is what just they have shapes. So they have specific shapes. So this was recorded. This is actually on my iPad, and you can get this. You can have your own system for $200. You invest in a small microphone, download the app, and it's the same AI that you're spending $400 a year for, except now it's free. So you spend it by the microphone. It's called an Echometer Touch. It's by Wildlife Acoustics. If you're interested in doing your own batting, this is what you'll see on your iPad or on your phone. Right now, I think they only make Androids for or microphones for Android. Apple doesn't play well with others anymore, and so I have an old Apple one, and as soon as it's gone, it won't work anymore. So I don't lend it out. Okay. But this is our rarest bat. So it's a northern long-eared bat. It's got this is called a frequency modulated call. It's very up and down, and this is like these are different pulses. And so broadband, which just means that it samples a large number of frequencies, in this case between 35 and 90 kilohertz. If you know physics, how many of you took physics? Probably a few, enough. So there's a relationship between pitch and wavelength, right? So the higher the wavelength, the smaller the higher the pitch, the smaller the wavelength, the smaller the insect that thing can detect. And so northern long-eared bats can basically pick a mosquito off of a leaf. So they're very good at assessing their environment. Then you've got critters like this is the big brown bat. That's about 25 kilohertz. If you actually measure the wavelength, it's a moth. It's mostly feeding on things like moths. This is a little brown bat. It looks a little bit different than a northern long-eared bat. But if you look at these enough, we've got 7 bats. There's a few that are hard to tell apart. These and silver-haired bats are hard to tell apart. These two are hard to tell apart. But for the most part, you looked at a sonogram and you're like, that's a red bat. That's a little brown bat. That's a northern long-eared bat. And you can hear it and you can see it pretty quickly. Okay. And so it's pretty cool. So this is what the detectors are doing that we have out. And so this is our primary data, and we can get a lot of it. And it's higher quality. It's different. If I were to, Dave, Redell, Paul White, and I did we were up netting bats in Pigeon Lake, which is up near Drummond, Bayfield County. We put nets out, and then we also did a survey with microphones, and we got 6 species of bat with microphones, and we got 1 species of bat in nets. So if you're trying to do a census of diversity, your acoustic census is going to actually yield better data than all of the people hours that it's going to take to put up nets. If you need to put collars, or you need to put pit tags, or if you need to get a sex, or you need to get an age, you need to get your hand on that bat, right? And so now you have to net that bat. So we have all this data, and we look at all this data from the 3 detectors that my students and I have been looking at, and we start to learn a couple things. One, different parts of the state have different kind of dominant bat species. And so here in central Wisconsin, our dominant bat is a red bat. It's a really cool, beautiful migratory bat. Down in the southeast, near Milwaukee, your dominant bat is the big brown bat. And up north, it was the little brown bat and the red bat. Okay, so these were the kind of like when we looked at the detector data, those were the dominant bats. So I'm just going to focus on Kemp because this is one of the bats that we're most interested in terms of just the demise from white nose syndrome. So white nose syndrome showed up in April of 2014. Was the first time that we detected it in a cave down near Dubuque, as well as a cave up on the UP border. Okay, so it came in both up from the Mississippi and in through the UP simultaneously, and it hit Wisconsin in 2014 simultaneously at two different parts of the state. So one idea was like, well, it'll take a few years for the white nose syndrome to have an effect. It didn't take a few years. It was an immediate effect. So within the first year that white nose syndrome arrived, at that detector, activity went down about 85%. And then 2 more years after that, it was pretty much next to nothing. And it was super depressing, going out with detectors in northern Wisconsin, turning them on, and it's just like really quiet, super quiet. Where every other year over here, it was like World War III. There's just like bats everywhere. It was just mayhem. Okay, and so this is kind of the current state. Like when I think of northern Wisconsin now, there's just not a lot of bat activities. Now, I mentioned that those DNR detectors, they're not really invested in fixing those. We're fighting to have the one at Schmeekley fixed. But what I've been doing now is just finding other partners that are willing to host like better detectors. So instead of these old Anabats, we're investing in Wildlife Acoustics SM4 bats, nice units. So one of my students, Josh Skatum, who again recently tragically passed away in a car accident down in Tucson at the way too young age of 28. But he was an educator. He was working at a zoo in Tucson, environmental ed student, no, a captive wildlife student. And so he did an internship at Wildwood Zoo. We got a grant. He did this beautiful sign. And if you go to Wildwood Zoo, you'll find our detector there. And that's been collecting data since 2016. Some of the cool data there, we found pretty healthy populations of little brown bats in Marshfield, about 2 years past when they were pretty much gone everywhere else. So Marshfield seemed to be like the last place that, like the last bastion in Wisconsin, but now their populations are down. This is a Joe Myers. He's an environmental science teacher at Marquette High School, my alma mater in Milwaukee. And these are his students. Michael and Joe are 2 wildlife students that came up here from Milwaukee. But Joe said, hey, we'd like to host a bat detector at our they have a really cool new place near Holy Hill, if you've ever been down in that area. It's called the Catholic Ecology Center. And so they have a bat detector there. And so we get data from, I think it's called Neosho, Neosho, tiny little town in down just north of Milwaukee there. Beautiful property. It's an old Girl Scout camp. But they're collecting data, and it's part of what their mission is just to be good stewards and to collect data for us. And so, and then we share that data back with the high school, and then they can actually analyze that and do some cool stuff with that.
Oh,
Yeah. And so one of my favorite, we do something, has anyone heard of BioBlitz? BioBlitz? I know Bob's been on a BioBlitz. So the Milwaukee Public Museum, their director has been doing Ellen Sensky, kind of one of the founders of BioBlitz. She brought it to Milwaukee. We've been doing BioBlitzes every summer. The Urban Ecology Center, we went out on a BioBlitz with the Door County Land Trust to a place called Chambers Island, which is in the middle of Green Bay. Okay, it's about 7 miles off of Green Bay, or into Green Bay. And I brought bat detectors, and I was like so excited when I turned on the bat detectors because it sounded like northern Wisconsin in 2010. That's what it sounded like. And this was in 2018. this was a little brown bat colony underneath like a bat box. And so no one had seen this beautiful pattern in years, right? This is what a healthy bat colony, an active bat box looks like. If you want to know, is my bat box active? Look underneath it, you know? And this will tell you if it's active. So we were like, this is great. And so we got one of the landowners on the island. There's like 38 owners. It's old Sturgeon Bay money and old Milwaukee money. If you know, and you ever hear Schlitz beer? Okay, or the Eline family. Okay, if you've ever been down to the Performing Arts Center. So Milwaukee, you know, you got Schlitz and Eline. So they've got a lot of houses on here, and then you got some old Sturgeon Bay money. So it's so you have to kind of know someone. It's privately owned. It's the Wild West out there. If you've ever been to Chambers Island, it's just a nut farm of awesome. It's like really cool. But we had a private landowner sponsor a detector. They're like, we were so excited. We were telling them what this meant. They were just like, what can we do? I'm like, would you like to host a bat detector? And so they like, how much does it cost? I said, this is how much it costs. And they're like, here. And then we had to get it out there. And so basically it's just a matter of, they send me discs every year. I send them data and then I send them the discs back. And then it's a matter of, can we get the discs out and back? So we've been doing that since 2019 was our first summer. And these are the little brown bats. So they're just crazy, healthy little brown bat population out there. Now, this is a little bit misleading because sometimes they don't get the bat detector set up right away. It's like, when are we going to get out there to our cabin and do all of that? So I'm less interested in, I don't see this as a drop. I'm more interested in like, what does the community look like? What does the bat community look like? And so, well, here's just kind of like so it's Door County Land Trust. Basically, a lot of this forest is in like a conservation easement. So, which is nice because that's all potential bat habitat. All of those little holes in the tree, all those snags, you know, so there's something going on on Chambers Island that maybe we can't replicate anywhere else. But it's looking like a bat refuge for our little brown bats. And so this is like the little brown bat population in 2018. Half the community was little brown bats. And more or less, that's kind of still what we're seeing. We're seeing little browns, and this is Llano. These are red bats, little browns and red bats, little browns and red bats. One of my students, Rachel Conkle, was looking at this data, and she said, it seems like when little brown bat populations decline, red bat populations decline. But red bats aren't affected by white nose syndrome. So why would red bats decline in response to little brown bats? And so she started looking at the literature, and she said it looks like eavesdropping, that when a little brown bat is foraging down near a microphone, which is kind of when we're picking them up, red bats hear the little brown bat foraging and pick up that there's food down there, and they'll just drop down where the little brown bats are. So they're just listening. They're eavesdropping, like on the conversation that the little brown bats are having with their food. And when the little brown bats went away, the red bats went away in response. So it's not like the red bats are in peril. They're just not picking up on that environmental cue of little brown bat. But here they are. Okay, a lot of little brown bats, a lot of red bats, a lot of little brown bats, a lot of red bats. And this is last summer. So this is super encouraging. Okay. And then the last thing I'll talk about are the bridges. This is the research I was doing last summer with the Department of Transportation, where all of our bats now are, well, some of them are federally protected, some are species of special concern, and then we're going through that process with the DNR this year again. But because some are on the Endangered Species Act, whenever you're doing a bridge repair, you kind of have to take that into account. So we're trying to get an idea, what are the characteristics of bridges that might be where bats might use them as day roosts. And so this is one, if you've ever picked strawberries at Arnold's and you're here, you drive over this bridge. It's a pretty little bridge on Mill Creek and Highway PP. So that was the first place I went. So what I did is I'd go check out the bridge, There's a whole, there's a whole protocol for that to see if it's being used by bats. I'd put bat detectors under the bridge and I'd put a bat detector about 100 meters off the bridge and just compare the two communities. And it turns out like, so this bridge wasn't being used by bats, but here's an example of a bridge that is used by bats. And so here we've got Mill Creek, but now we're up on County Highway O, just south of, what's that little town over there? Rapids, Junction City, Junction City, okay, where that one really good brewery got its start. Central Waters. So it's just south of Junction City on O. So it's O, the bridge going over Mill Creek. I've got a detector. So this is the size of my detector right here. It's a tiny little thing called an audio moth. It's super cool. I can record everything from frogs to bats with this. And so we're using it. We brought some to Costa Rica and we deployed them. They're just great. It's open source. It's developed in England. And you can only buy these on GoFundMe pages. So you get a bunch of people together, you buy 100 at a time, and then you just kind of share them out. So I grabbed 10 of them from the University of Illinois, and they're just wonderful. Nobody can see them, so no one's going to bug them. Okay, but under this bridge, here's a basically sign of a bat. Here you got some guano, and so they're using this. They're using this structure. Here's some guano here, and so again, I had detectors under the bridge and away from the bridge. And when I looked at what was using it, I was like super excited. Okay. So this is like all little brown bats. Okay. So there's little brown bats that are using this bridge. And this is exactly what DOT wants to know. It's like, now we can kind of go out, we're going to try to get more data on that. Can we characterize a bridge? So when a crew goes in, they'll look at, well, this isn't the kind of bridge bats are using. This is exactly the kind of bridge. There's water running underneath. They're about yay high. Above the water, so there's a lot of things that we're measuring that suggest this is a pretty good bat habitat. But those structures are good day roosts. Okay, so those are, and so we want to know that. Okay, and if you're interested in that, Bree's giving a talk. So this is my co-conspirator at the Department of Transportation. She's going to give a talk on the 27th over in the TNR on campus. About building bridges with sound policy. So we're doing an entire series on policy right now. And she's going to talk about what policy looks like on the ground. If I'm dealing with the ESA and I'm trying to work, with the Department of Transportation, what does that mean for us? Okay. And so, yeah, so she'll talk about that. All right. I am out of slides. Okay. So thank you very much. I don't know your program. Either I went 5 minutes over, or I went 5 minutes under, or you don't have I don't know anything about this. It's not like a classroom.
Do you have any
The
questions?
fact that you didn't walk out 5 minutes ago tells me that you're not my students. Yeah.
So the white nose syndrome, is that just in North America right now? You mentioned it was in Europe. It's here. Is it elsewhere in the world?
I mean, it's just getting up into, it's North America. So
Yeah.
it's again, it's cold loving fungus. So it's going to be found in caves, maybe more temperate. But if you look at the spread, it kind of like spread from New York, down the Appalachians, across the Ohio River Valley, up the Mississippi. And all of the, all the caves and karst and all that there. And then it came in through Copper Country in the UP and all the caves there. It jumped, like it leapfrogged clear to Washington State in 1 year. And so that pattern suggests that someone took it, that it was a spelunker that basically spread that. So it's unlikely a bat just like went gonzo and just went to Washington State to spread it. But yeah, it's a North American thing. It's not, I don't know about it in Mexico or anything like that, or over in Europe or in Asia. So it's North American, yeah.
With white nose syndrome, is it always fatal, or is there a certain percentage that can survive?
Well, we're kind of interested in that. So we thought maybe there might be a size effect. So the little brown bat, the fact that the big brown bats don't seem to be, the mortality is not as bad. Maybe there's like a size difference. They just have maybe a body condition or something that they can just escape the effect of it. So we thought maybe what's coming out, maybe the larger big brown bats are coming through the bottleneck, because it's a bottleneck, that's what it is. So we don't know. That's part of what bat ecologists are investigating. And I don't have that data, but it might just be size.
And beyond the lack of the more bugs that are around because there are less bats and loss of a species, are there other implications of losing all of those bats for North America?
Well, that's kind of the big unknown. I mean, we know bats, like colonies of bats, for example, Mexican free-tailed bats can eat, a ton of insects a night. And so if you're not eating a ton of insects a night, now you've got a ton of extra insects that you got to deal with. And it's that we tend to think of mosquitoes just because we're mosquito-centric humans, it's like that's the only bug that's really out there. So we've got so we do have mosquitoes. I also am concerned about moths, because moths were caterpillars, and caterpillars are defoliants, and so there's going to be a crop effect, on caterpillars that aren't getting picked off by some of these as well. So I guess the jury's still out, on that. There's so many things that are impacting bug populations, bats just being one of them. So, Bob?
Has the public's attitude toward bats improved? Do people understand the problems and not to be quite as quick to try to kill them as they used to be?
I like to think so. I mean, I think they're more empathetic towards bats. Doesn't mean that they love bats, but there's not maybe might still be some fear of bats, but yeah, not just just the emotional disdain of bats. There's maybe a little bit of when people see how many threats bats are facing, there's maybe a little bit more empathy. That's really what the Bat Festival was trying to do, and what we were trying to do just with some of the bat programming, getting the word out. So I think we've done a pretty good job. I haven't met a lot of the general public that are anti-bat. Of course, I'm self-selecting when we do pet programs. It's the people that show up that want to learn about bats that are going to those. And so of course I think everybody loves bats because they're coming to the Bat Festival. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I haven't seen like a survey, of bat survey. That'd be interesting. You could ask Jennifer. Yeah.
Didn't bats have a reputation for carrying rabies?
So that's a good point, and I still talk to my students about that. You can get your hands on a bat. Don't get your hands on the bat. Okay? So they're not the #1 carrier of rabies in Wisconsin wildlife, but they are the #1 transmitter of rabies. So it's still the way that most humans get rabies in North America is from bats, but there's more higher prevalence of rabies in other like foxes and skunks and raccoons and other things. Okay, and what it generally is our empathy. If you've heard of Jenna Geezy, kind of the famous case in Fond du Lac, the girl that was bit by a silver-haired bat. She comes to all the bat festivals. She loves sharing her story. We know her very well. And she's very kind of self-deprecating when it comes to, she still has some neurological problems. She's got a family now too. She's married with children. She still says she walks into walls because she's a little bit unsteady on her feet, just from long-term neurological damage. It's called the Milwaukee Protocol or the Milwaukee Miracle or the Milwaukee whatever, because her doctor will also come. I think there's only been 8 people in the world that actually have survived rabies, right? So it's not like it's all cured. No, it's still pretty effectively 100% fatal, 100% fatal. And so at that level, I am not going to risk, my students. My students will be like, there's a bat on the side of the science building. Should we do something about it? No, No, the bat, I go to that bat in the science building, it's a big brown bat, it's tucked up right against the, right by the ceiling on the outside. It shows that space. It is cold against the wall. It'll be there for a few days, it'll move on. Okay, the bat knows what it's doing. That bat is probably 20 years old. It's wiser than my students when it comes to picking a place to hang out for the night. So just leave it, okay? What'll happen though is they'll find it on the ground and it's still alive and it's a little bit weak in February or something like that. It's probably starved. It probably doesn't have rabies, but am I gonna take that chance? No. I will take care of it myself if I know about it, but I'm not, I'll get calls, can you come and take care of this sick bat? No. Just leave it. I'm not gonna drive halfway across the state for a sick bat. I love bats, but I love my wife more. Okay, so. But you're not wrong. They are the #1 transmitter of rabies. And it's, I think one study in Colorado, 40% of the hoary bats that were collected and tested for rabies had rabies. Now, that is 40% of opportunistic collections. Those are bats that they picked up and were sent in, not bats that they collected in the wild, okay? So the prevalence, rabies affects bats, and bats will be sick on the ground. You don't know why that bat's sick on the ground. Don't risk it.
Is there, because the white nose syndrome is a fungus, is there any chance that the bat's immune system could adapt to take care of it, or fungus?
That's what we think happened in Europe, right? So where they're not so much affected by it, that there is some type of immunity towards it. And we're just kind of going through it now. So yeah, I don't know. Why do some bats are more susceptible to others? The myotis bats, 85 to 100% colony collapse. So the entire hibernacula. When they first found this in New York, it's just like dead bats everywhere, and like the entire colony was gone. Okay, so are we going to see that level of mortality decrease over time? We're still in it. It hasn't even been 10 years in Wisconsin. Hasn't been 20 years, since it showed up here. And so this is a big problem, I guess, right? Because how do you vaccinate? How do you disinfect a cave? Have you ever been in a cave? It's like don't breathe it. Yeah, what?
Nooks and crannies.
Yeah, there's disinfecting a cave, big problem. Vaccinating a colony of bats, big problem. And so it's an interesting problem, and there are people working on it. But yeah, right now it's just trying to keep the fungus from spreading. From us spreading it, so don't wear the same clothes, and if you go from this cave to that cave, just kind of be aware of those things. So I'm a bat steward or a cave steward at Horseshoe Cave, if you've ever been over to Door County. And so you can only wear, there's like a clothes that are only used for Horseshoe Cave. And so you show up there and you put on the Horseshoe Cave clothes, and you go in and you do your bat program, and you go out and you take off your Horseshoe Cave clothes, and it goes into a trailer. And some beautiful person cleans the Horseshoe Cave clothes and puts them back in the trailer for the next group. So that level of thoughtfulness to keep it from spreading. So we'll see. Yeah.
You sort of implied that the bats in Europe are somehow immune or resistant to the white nose. Is that the case, or is it?
As far as I can tell from my reading that they don't go through these large collapses. It's still there, but it could be just a kind of an epidemiology artifact. They don't have the large colonies, so it's not going. If you've got a huge density of bats, if you've ever seen a dense, just a hibernating bats, they're just like right next to each other, so that it's a superorganism, so that fungus can basically spread. You don't have that in European bats. There's a bat, there's a bat. So maybe one of them gets it, doesn't do well, but they're not spreading it to the colony.
But the bats there do die from it as well.
That's, I don't think so. I mean, at least I haven't read that the bats there are still dying. They may be, but it's not something that's showing up in the literature as something that's being investigated. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna go with, I don't know. That's totally valid scientific response. So, yeah, good question. Any other questions? Before I change beers? Anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks again for coming tonight. We have our weekly walks still happening, rotating between Saturday and Sunday. So please join us on those local weekly walks, led by our board of directors. Rob Pendergast is doing a great job with that. Great way to keep community and the bird community meeting each other and spending the nights, mornings. We go out about an hour, maybe hour and a half, sometimes 2. So it's just a really enjoyable time to just start the day. So if that interests you, the dates and locations of where they're walking is online. If you have questions about the pictures in the back, please see Jenny Christopher here, and she can help address any questions. Our next program is next month, and that is going to be from Jacob, and I'm forgetting Jacob's last name. Jacob Wolf. And he's going to be talking about MODIS stations, how we're using MODIS stations and towers for monitoring bird migration. So hopefully you can join us. Yeah, and yeah, it's amazing technology, which is blowing my mind. So please join us for that. Snacks right in the back, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
I did send someone an email from the DNR, so they're looking for bat ambassadors. And so there's some information, I don't know how to get it to you all. But there's a training up in Ashland, but there's another one right here in central Wisconsin. It might just be out in me, because it says Millador, and I think that's beautiful.
Okay.
And so if anyone's interested, it's a part of the Master Naturalist program, but you don't have to be a Master Naturalist to be a bat ambassador. So if that's something you're interested in, stay tuned for that email.
Yes, and one more.
Couple things related to that. I do have the contact information for the DNR person who coordinates roost monitoring, and they're always looking for bat roost monitors. And then Tracy Arnold, who works for the county in the Land and Water Conservation Department, has bat monitoring devices that you can check out. So she'll go through a little bit of training, and then you can either do a route that's recommended by DNR, and then those data will be submitted to them, or she lets you just take it out and check out your neighborhood. We did around Wolf Lake one time. So it's pretty fun, and it gives you instantaneous, like, which bats are being detected. So that's kind of cool too.
Thank you for that.